Alright, so this is journal number 4 for me. I'm going to be talking about chapter 4 from the Grunland text. It's about premarital intimacy. Of course, I found it very interesting. Of course, who doesn't find talking about sex and physical touch and uh, intimacy, interesting whether you're married or not? I mean, God created us as sexual beings, so um, but I did enjoy reading it from a Christian perspective. The world, it just seems like everything on TV and on the media is always sex, 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 sex. But it was nice to read some stuff from a Christian perspective. I took human sexuality back in the last summer of 2009, so I either learned most of the stuff then, or um, just knew it beforehand from other classes. I mean, whatever. I'm in my mid 20s. I'm not stupid. But, I guess, you know, a lot of what I enjoyed was, you know, the author talking about, you know, boundaries as far as in couples who are not married, and how to, how couples might come about finding out, and learning, well, what is still appropriate, what are things that we can do that, still allow us to feel like that we're in God's will, and, what's crossing the line. I mean, there is no black and white, let's be honest. Yes, the obvious is don't have sex before you're married. That's in the Bible, that's a sin. But, what about kissing? What about holding hands? What about French kissing? Well, there's not a verse that says thou shalt not French kiss. But, there are other verses that, do talk about, how, you know, you know, some things in moderation, as far as I think that those verses are like, have to do with, in the New Testament about whether some of the new Christians should eat meat that was, like given up to idols, and whether or not they should still eat it or not. And I think in that passage it was like, meat is meat, it depends on the situation. But the author did kind of come up with like a little kind of chart sort of thing, and a way to kind of figure out, oh, well, what's appropriate at different levels. And to a certain degree, I agree with it, but, um, you know, I think to some of it, I think it's not realistic. But then again, God demands excellence, and so just because something's not realistic doesn't mean that it's not obtainable and that people can't do it. One part that I found especially interesting was the section on trial marriage. That's where a couple a lot of times will move in together, cohabitate, either before they get married or, choose to live together to make sure that they're compatible. And I noticed that there really wasn't any information about the fact that, married, from what I've learned from other classes, is that couples that cohabitate before they get married kind of have their honeymoon period then. Everything's great and wonderful, but then once they get married, they continue in the relationship, whereas couples who don't live together before they get married, they initially have that honeymoon period right after they get married, and, then kind of move into the normal type relationship, the ups and the downs of being married, and being in a marital relationship. So that's definitely, I think, a disadvantage of cohabitating and living together, having a trial marriage. But, the author didn't mention that. He just talked about how there's a higher probability of divorce rates and yada, yada, yada. I wish that this text had much newer sources as far as things it's referencing. I'll admit, I don't know what year this book was published. I probably should have looked before I did this, but I have to say that a lot of the information's from like the 80s and the 90s, and I feel like it's 2010, and so some of that information could be outdated. But I enjoyed reading about common law marriage. I didn't really know much about it, I'd always heard about it. People say, oh, well, that's his common law wife, or especially down in Georgia where I'm from. So that was kind of interesting. And then there was also a section on birth control and abortion. But the author didn't really actually say anything about abortion in the section. He just talked about how with the advent of these new birth control methods that, you know, people, were able to be more promiscuous, yet the birth rate was actually still rising, even though there was this new invention of birth control. So, I guess from what the author was saying, that, more people are just having sex. And I would have liked to have read some information about abortion. I'm very pro-life. I believe in the sanctity of life, and so it would have been interesting to read something on that. But, I guess the author just didn't feel it was important enough to do so. So, anyway, I certainly enjoyed reading about this and can't wait to read about the next section.